So we're here today talking with artist Selby Ginn for the WORA Connects Conversation series, where we're looking at home and connection to land and the role of making in that. So thanks, Selby, for talking to us. We just thought maybe we could just start off asking you to just tell us a little bit about your art practice would be good.
My art practice is based around making three-dimensional sculptures using leather as my base material, which I process into small segments essentially and then re-weave onto a wire armature that I make. That entails a lot of cutting, processing, and a lot of time to prepare the materials for the actual sculptures before I've even made them. So that definitely has an effect on what I make at the end.
In terms of size?
Choices that can be affected by the material as I'm exploring that, making that, if that makes sense.
So what's the background of making these works? How did you end up here?
I ended up here, I used to work in fashion footwear when I got out of uni and doing my honours.
Do you think that has an impact, like the fashion and...
The material does, it's just that connection. So I moved over to Canada and my materials were really limited with what I could get, and also so was my funding. So I used to get the swatches from the shoe fairs from the designers, and it was still my material of choice, leather, but I wasn't buying full hides like I was throughout uni. And so the sizes were a lot smaller. And I had to kind of figure out how to use my newfound material because I couldn't afford what I would ideally like to use to make larger soft sculptures that I stitched. So my process completely changed. My sculpture practice was like segued in a major way by money and place.
And so now, would you be in a position now to, if you wanted to, you could use the big ones, but you still choose to use the small ones, do you think?
I could, however, I still get my leather for my sculpture practice through people who make shoes in Melbourne. So I've sort of continued to use the remnants and the excess of others because it seems quite counterintuitive to, at this point, and ethically for me, to use such a sort of sacred material frivolously. And there's so much waste. Not that that's really something that I align myself, I'm not about using waste, it's just a choice that I suppose coming through the 90s and the 2000s and now into 2020, that it's just an obvious choice that you need to make to keep making and to keep practicing. So I get my remnants from Claire Best in Melbourne, and she'll just give me a box. Fantastic. And I just use her colours and leftovers, I suppose.
In a way that's quite interesting too, because it's there's a certain element beyond your control in terms of the work, which is quite lovely, I think.
Well, I really like it. I really love using other people's materials. In terms of I have to use those parameters, that's it. And I can push and pull them if I've got some leftovers myself as well. So, and Hugh with his furniture, he has remnants that I use. He just gave me some the other day. And so...
What sort of remnants?
Leather. So he uses that for the inside furniture.
Right. Do you, is the leather that you get, is that mostly Australian, do you think, or
it's tanned all over the world. So I can get leather from an Australian tannery. I go to Greenhouse in Ballarat, out near Snake Valley. But again, I have to buy full hides, which I have done for other work, for that large work when it was shown in Melbourne. It has a giant, big black 2.5 metre box, leather box that it sits in. And that seemed really important. But generally I like them.
So just to tell us about that work that you're referring to, what's it called?
It's called Omnipresent Incarnate, a really large title. It's a 2.1 metre male humanesque form that I created. It's like a warrior for the Venice Biennale for personal structures that shown at Palazzo Bembo in 2013. It was a really large scale work that took 1.5 years to complete, which I'd started in Canada and then shipped home in boxes. And then I was approached by Personal Structures to show it in Venice. And so that work was the largest piece I've ever made and the most challenging financially and personally, but well worth the effort.
It's an incredible work and incredibly intricate. How long do you think you spent making it?
I spent full time on it for like at least 5 months.
Yeah.
As I have to make the material and the structure and then weave the skin, the outer layer. So it was really full on.
Can I ask, because you said you started, or your background's drawing and painting, so it sounds like in art school you were working with leather and doing soft sculpture, is that right?
Yeah.
So was that something you knew when you went to art school initially, this is how you wanted, like, that's the medium you wanted to work with?
No, I came across leather when I was in my first year at RMIT doing drawing after I'd gone to Swinburne TAFE for 2 years prior in Paran. And I started using leather because I wanted to I was really interested in the body and how we view ourselves, not really how other people view us, but how we experience ourselves in the world. So I was making reproductions of myself in pigskin, which is normally a lining material. So like, again, somewhat of a by-product, internal product, not like the exterior flashy smooth leather had nipples still attached, which most hides have removed. So I used to use those on the structures, and I hand stitched them all and made female bikinis and based on myself that I would wear on top of.
So it was performative as well?
There was a level of performance, and so I made a human comforter, a big person, or a large person who could hug, that was made out of leather, that sort of snuggled into your body, which I thought would be good for inmates, stuff that was sort of about people's experience with themselves, but or myself, replicated through leather, pigskin.
Yeah, so it's certainly been a long history for you of working with that material in particular. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it has already had a life, so for me that's really important that you don't really the animal is, well, we don't know what the animal holds within itself, and so for me it's sort of an easy transaction to sort of create another form or human form out of a hide, and to respect that life by using all of the scraps. For me now it's, well, not scraps isn't really the right word, they're not really scraps. You couldn't,
offcuts,
but offcuts isn't even the right word. I've been trying to think of what the right word is, and I've been really struggling to come up with it. Not remnants even, because it's not even remnants of its remnants is like a left.
Yeah,
there's no
it's
still the hide, like it's still part of a whole. So
well, I guess in a way what you're doing is reinvigorating it, giving it new life, and
that's my plan. A life that's has longevity rather than this very quick, fast paced.
And especially given like modern fashion, everything's so disposable, and so it's kind of beautiful in that way.
Is there a darker side to it as well in terms of appropriating another animal's skin, or is that not so much a component of what you're working at? Is it more the positive?
Oh, I think there's definitely that. I think there's definitely a relationship to classification and to how we perceive or judge or try not to judge. Exactly what everyone's trying to do at the moment, come up with a whole new language related to the human race with otherness, and how we classify otherness and how we make it okay to be an other. We are an other regardless. So for me, the hide definitely has a relationship with how we see ourselves, I suppose. But yeah, I don't really want to dictate what I feel about that. It's more just a reflection, for an internal reflection for somebody else, if they want to participate in that in themselves.
And is there a crossover with your art making and your jewellery making?
Yeah.
Do you see the materials? I can see leather a lot.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Well, the quilted form in the jewellery is like where I started with my sculpture practice, so I was filling them with fill and wool, and now I only use like locally sourced wool from farmers who just don't have a use for it or don't know what to do with it, so I just go and grab a bag or two and help with an exchange of some money, whatever they think's appropriate or not. So I definitely still have a relationship with wanting to make a body, you know,
with
even,
stuffing.
yeah, like I really enjoy
From a textural.
like creating a body that you could wear, like a miniature version of that. So yeah, still using the eye, whether you want to say that comes from the evil eye or has a relationship to looking, you know, symbolism, you could take it any way you like, but my jewellery practice definitely, it's like a parallel life that runs next to my sculpture practice. Yeah.
Something that I'm just thinking about is, so it strikes me that your practice is figurative, basically, and that, you know, one of the key things that we're interested in and want to talk about today is like connection to place. So that might be home is what we're interested in, but also interested in connection to a landscape. So the fact that your work is figurative kind of already sets up something of a connection, because a figure has to sit within a space.
An environment,
So do you feel, how do you feel your work speaks to that, to the idea of connection to its surroundings?
In terms of my experience of my surroundings, like Susan and I were talking earlier, and I knew that I wanted to be an artist from a really young age, but I was in grade 3, so it was quite interesting as a perspective. So I got this interesting relationship started building with art and creativity, because I'd also moved a lot as a child, that I found that the process of making gave me a sense of place and a process that I otherwise didn't have going on in my brain with who I was and where I was. So through that time when I was working with Alice once a week, I started to process a lot of bigger questions, I suppose, about myself in the world while I was making work. So she really pushed me to really look at objects, whether it was a zucchini or a pumpkin, or which is what I was drawing at the time in a fruit bowl. Really wonderful, a really great base for launching off as a small child anyway, to start at the beginning, just observational drawing. But that in turn started an observation of myself, which I started asking questions about my identity and who I was and what was Selby. And I remember asking myself that repeatedly, but never actually outwardly discussing that with my parents or anyone else. It was just like an internal dialogue about being alive, really.
That's fascinating. Which came through the engagement with the...
Yeah.
So do you think that's to do with time, just like the time? Just because we very rarely like sit with anything, so do you think it was just because of just sitting with the thing for that long?
And regularly, I did do it every Tuesday night. Probably. I mean, there was definitely and then from the still life, I started working. I had a studio at home, of course, you know, because that's what you did. And I had a big enough bedroom. I lived upstairs in a granary, and I'd moved a lot, and I was only in grade 3, so I had a lot of space, and I had a big palette that Alice had given me, a big glass palette with colour sort of gradients, and it was beautiful, big white professional palette like that an artist would have had. But, you know, I used to use it in my studio by myself, and that really pushed me into I used to draw the images of the Gemini head horoscopes. I was a Gemini, and so I was really exploring concepts about who I was with this palette by myself in my funny little studio, questioning identity and my own self, I suppose, and exploring that. So I think that is one thing that has continued on with me when I make.
So
is that
it does, but so it sounds, because I'm interested in the process component, what you're talking about, and also with your work now, but back then too. Is it that at that point the work was functioning as a reflective object? Do you think that it was a mirror for you, or was it, as Helen was saying, like sometimes there's a component to doing something that allows all these bigger thoughts to take place simultaneously? It's almost like parallel stuff happening.
I think both.
Both,
yeah. And that was the consistent thing as I've like moved a lot. I don't know.
Yes.
Some people have moved so much. Some people have, like, you know, but making in a domestic environment has always been a consistent part of my life. That's been like the one consistent thing that I suppose I've had out of my other 3 siblings. None of them ever done anything. Then none of them they're creative, but they're not creative. They don't have any creative pursuits, if you know what I mean. Like they didn't make anything or get inspired to sit with me and make anything with me or anything, you know, like it's very much a solo driven.
So in grade 3, where were you at that point where you had
Richmond, Tasmania.
Ah,
beautiful place.
And tell us about your itinerant life. Like you've moved a lot in the time, haven't you?
Yeah. So by that stage I'd already been to like, I don't know, maybe 5 primary schools.
By grade 3, gosh.
So yeah, at least I reckon.
Because of your dad's profession?
Maybe because of, I don't know why, because they just liked moving as well. We'd lived on the mainland and then we'd come back to Tassie, and so I'd been to schools I'd been 2 schools on the mainland in 2 years, and then got back to Tassie and then went to another school and then moved again, went to another school and then moved out to Richmond and went to Richmond Primary. So by that stage it was probably about 5 or 6 primary schools. And so, yeah, like just didn't really have any, was a bit wobbly, you know, didn't really have any grounding as such, like no real friends or no consistency or routine or anything like that.
Predictability?
So, nothing, no. We would just do whatever we liked, whenever we liked. Didn't have my parents didn't have regular jobs, so it was like we could just chop and change. Sort of to our own beat, I suppose.
So the creative process becomes is it grounding, would you say? Is that sort of what's happening?
For me,
yeah, for you.
For me, yeah. Okay. And even for my partner, watching him and I move overseas, we completely transformed our tiny apartment into a giant studio, and our landlord turned up and Hugh had the entire wall covered in drawings, like wall to window to wall meters, and I had a table with all my leather, and he thought we were, well, actually he was really surprised and delighted at the same time, but like really overwhelmed, and he was like, I just wish my partner could possibly do this, something like this, like, you know, he was a bit confused.
Didn't know what to say.
But really excited. We had a drop sheet down. It was fine. We, you know, there was. We would never leave a mark. It was like we were cleaners. You know, actually, it was pretty cool that we got rid of everything. That was a lot of blue, soft pastel that he was using at the time. But yeah, like I had a table, and we just would convert sort of any space into a studio, and domestic space is like very small. Like just a table was needed for that. Everything else was creative.
So there's been a big relationship between your domestic space and your art making.
Yeah, it has to.
And so if that's happening in terms of the space, is that also happening in terms of like you internally? Like is your art making a huge part of your domestic self, or like or your that's the right word, but like just you in the world at home basically. Making is a big part of that.
Yeah. I make
So do you
in the
reckon if we took away your art practice, would that alter the way that you connect to your home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably be I did it. I mean, I took it away, as you guys know, for a period of time.
Yeah.
And I survived. But I suppose I was very different. Like, you know, you can compartmentalize and sort of put other things in places in your brain to manage for a period of time. But I think if you've been doing that for a long time, you need a break from that to be able to continue to grow and take on more with life. So I think if you need to put that at bay for too long, it can be detrimental, like the rhizomes to Losing-Guittari. You know, think about something like that.
So, as in you're repressed, or you're sort of denying a part of yourself, so it takes energy to deny that.
Absolutely.
Whereas a more freer form of you is going to be having a creative living space.
Absolutely.
Where you're actively making that space.
But you do need to be careful with how large that gets in your domestic space.
And that happens sometimes. Does it get too large?
Yes. And then you are told to curb the largeness of the excitement.
Somebody gives you that feedback.
No, but you know, like you gotta check yourself before you wreck yourself. You know, like you gotta just, you know, you just gotta keep it. I mean, with children and life and art and all of the things that you need to maintain relationships, like there are so many expectations that are individualized, I think, onto each one that you need to keep the things that keep you alive going too, don't you?
What about an impact in reverse? Like, how do you think the household's affected by having you're saying that there's the potential negative impact, but what about positive?
Oh no, there's both.
There's both, yeah.
Always both.
Yeah.
With everything.
So the kids participating or observing, do they get involved?
Yeah. Sunday helps me with my threading of my leather, and Marley likes to chop.
Great.
I mean, you know, it obviously slows the process down. However, I think them witnessing outside materials and ideas and art is a really informative way for them to express themselves in a time when they are little and they're learning to develop a language of their own and how they see the world. I know that it's been really positive for them to just witness it. They don't really ask me about what it is, but oh no, not another exhibition, you know, or something, but then they get really excited about it. It's like there's definitely a level of like, they understand there's a process involved with it, with exhibiting and making and doing, but that I don't want them to suffer also because of my practice. So there's an inclusion that happens. I'm hoping with the domestic and the creative, because I do think they can. I'm getting better at getting them to work together.
Yeah, and it sounds like it makes the home a very active place too, is one vibe I'm getting in terms of the doing you mentioned. So
yeah, I mean, well,
I'm sure there's all sorts of things that go on, but I'm guessing it sounds like it keeps people actions taking place, as opposed to say a place that's just about comfort or repose or lying around or
there's some
recovery
action
from being out in the world. Sounds like the world's in here as well as out there.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I don't know how it works for you guys, but there's definitely a Yuki will draw a face, for example, and she will basically start drawing ideas of sculptures that she thinks that I should sort of start working on, and they're amazing, and they're blocked in colour, and they have that lineage of time that I hope that I think about when I make work, which is place or time or a larger awareness of culture, really historical people living in a lineage, whether it be from indigenous cultures to colonialisation to like this melding of like all of it happening at the same time. And that through making, for me, the face at the moment and the head is like working that out, whether it be the warrior or the domestic colonial mother.
So it can be all encompassing.
Yeah, that you can tap into a deeper awareness through making work as well. I feel like at home and in the studio there's something else that happens because I do both. Yeah, I don't know if that's just a tangent, but
No. Well, that leads me to asking you about where we are at the moment and telling us a little bit about your home and where you're living right now. Obviously, it doesn't have to be specifically, but
in regional Victoria.
Yeah, in Central Vic. And where are we? Like,
We're
tell us
in
about your
Daylesford.
house. Yeah. Tell us about your home, or that we've set ourselves for the interview up here. Is this the table that you work at?
Yes, that's the window I sit in
Yeah.
at night, and in the morning, if I can get in a little bit of work before I take the kids to school. And well, we do, you know, like they can eat and I can do a little bit if I really want to, you know, if I've got something that I want to achieve. But yeah, this is where I work when I work at home. I have a very easily transportable kit now that I use to make my work. Otherwise it just doesn't get made, so I need to be really flexible with that. Even if I got stuck in the car, I could put it in the car and I could make work in the car if I needed to, you know.
Wow.
Just because sometimes it is like that. Life can be like that. I'm not pushed that far anymore, but I used to be when they were all smaller. So now I work from Daylesford. Our workshop's 5 minutes away, so I have a small, 4x6 studio inside a furniture workshop with my husband who works, and that's working really well. And it's literally 5 minutes away, and it's it is like there's this really fine string between now the workshop and the home that actually is like it's actually talking to each other, rather than when I'm home I feel like I can't think about work or can't process. It's too many things to process, and then I just want to make. Now I can actually do both in both places. Yeah.
Because your children are older, or because you've got the studio as a space that...
I think because I've just let go of a lot of preconceived ideas about art and the process and what that is to be an artist.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? What is it? I've been making consistently for 20 over years, and I don't necessarily think you need, to put too many heavy parameters on myself. The less, the more fluid.
Yeah, fluidity seems to, my impression of what you've talked about, seems to be a big part of what you do in terms of being able to pick up what you're doing and taking it somewhere else and integrating it into your life.
Yeah, it's essential.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no practice.
It doesn't happen.
It's like, what is then art to me? It's more the making. I love to read, but I haven't been able to read much. I love philosophy and ideas and researching about other cultures, but it's like I've sort of you have to choose at a point too and be realistic about what you can achieve. So
my other question I would have then is, with what you've just described, has that grounded you in this particular spot? Does this feel like a home, a proper home for you?
I don't really know what that is.
Right, so that's interesting. You don't know what that is?
I don't have like a baseline for that. So there's sure. Daylesford's lovely. The house that we're renovating is lovely, I'm sure.
It is lovely. Totally lovely.
But I'm not like attached.
You're not attached?
No.
Really?
No.
Have you ever been attached to anywhere?
No. I mean, I grew up in Tassie. I was attached to the idea of Tasmania. like as a concept of like a place that I would call home. When I fly into Hobart as a child, I remember flying in, and it is just breathtakingly beautiful. And I remember all of those inlets and Sorel and all of the waterways and the bridges and the Bay of Fire and Bicheno. I went there every school holidays for my childhood. Like, I have a very romantic relationship with that idea of place, but it's not, it's just, I don't have a tangible one. It's more like a memory.
And does
it's more
that
like
feel
a psychological.
So if you're saying that you don't have a real sense of home anywhere, do you experience that as a loss, or is that just how, like, do you feel, are you aware that many people do, and do you feel bereft that you don't? Or do you not? Because
I don't know if I can feel bereft about something. I don't know what it feels like, but I know that my art practice is my home, which is, I suppose, why I thought this interview would be really interesting, because that's only really been my constant my whole life. So, and I have fought for that for most of my life as well, to have that. So,
That's so interesting. So the thing that I'm interested in, which we haven't really talked about a lot yet, but the thing that I'm interested in specifically is how people, how we connect to, as like white Australians, how we connect to land that, you know, we've only been here for a few hundred years. So it's really interesting to hear what you say about you don't really connect. Because that just blows me out of the water in terms of my whole thing, because I'm like, but how do you connect? And you're like, well, I don't know.
So I always wanted to show the Venice Biennale from a small child. I knew about it. And I was like, oh, wow. But then I did. And that's really weird, because then I was like, oh, I did. Oh, awesome. That's amazing. But I was pregnant, and I was in a bit of a funny place in my mind as well, like this weird euphoric early, like 12 weeks pregnancy, like weird pregnant time, and being overseas alone and having to do a part funded trip, so still having requirements, being somewhere else, and then showing your work but having no one there to witness it, of course, because I'm not home, but I'm not home when I'm home, you know. So there's no one ever there to say, well done, look at you go. You're just like at the dance by yourself, standing in the corner going, oh my golly, and you're just alone. So there's this that you just I don't know how to say it. I don't even know how to say it. You get to witness yourself by yourself. So for me, being a white Australian, I've always struggled with it, and I suppose I do struggle with it.
What's the struggle?
That we don't know so much about where we live, and that there's this overlaying sort of idea that everything's okay, that like what happened, just sort of, not that it's okay, I don't feel like anything was okay, but I grew up in Tassie, so there were basically no Indigenous people or First Nations people there at all. And I went on a school trip to the Risdon prison, which everyone probably knows about because of Chopperby, at the Risdon prison, and I was in grade 4 at that point, and I was at Richmond Primary, and we went on a tour of the area, the gully, I suppose, of the Risdon prison, where it sits in this valley. I don't really know the name of it, but I felt the death and the destruction. I felt it in the land, and I was there. They were giving us information about Tasmania and some sort of historical references about the colonisation and what had happened. But basically, people were just murdered throughout the whole space, which I found out later. And I, as a very small person, I knew something was wrong. I knew there was not, I felt so disturbed by that day. Of course, I didn't tell anyone, because, you know, we didn't really talk about our days at the end of the day when I was little. But from that, I found myself to be in a problematic situation, because I knew that my grandparents had come from Europe. and I didn't quite know because someone had left England to be with somebody, and so they weren't supposed to have left, and so they arrived in Tassie because of love, and so it all just got lost in time. I don't even really know how they ended up in Tasmania and why, and then how they felt about being there. So you're sort of a displaced person.
So do you think that sounds like a formative experience in a way, and as a child I feel like that would have had
I've had lots of questions about Indigenous Australia from a really young age, but they were not answered, and they were just, there was no real class, there was no explanation as to why we were where we were, why were we colonised, what was the reason for leaving Europe exactly, like as for a small person.
Do you think that some of those issues might have had an impact on the fact that you don't feel at home here, or you don't feel...
Yeah, I think so. Hugh and I talk about it. Yeah, we talk about stuff like that.
And do you think that that's something that, does that in any way inform your art practice? Do you think that when you said that your art practice informs your connection to a domestic space, do you think that in a way that would be a working through connecting in a broader way?
Oh yeah, like I try to make, when I make a head, I mean what am I up to, like head number 8 I think. Yeah, I'm up to 8.
That's a lot actually, that's a huge piece of work.
Yeah, and that male humanesque form is all about, I suppose for me, like trying to figure out the ties backward, that retracing of time, I suppose, really, that I haven't traversed, but I know people have, and I know that becoming a mother was a bit like that with childbirth. There was definitely an area in childbirth that's unexplainable, that you can feel things that you otherwise wouldn't feel in another state about time and experience, and there is a universal understanding in that space with other women, and you can find them there to help you.
So you're sort of moving into a universal space, is that with work, do you think? Is there sort of a universal, like you're saying, it's every person, every culture, every time? Is that kind of part of it too, of sort of accessing something transcendental?
Yeah.
Is that
no, totally. I totally believe in all of those things.
Right.
Not, people might think that's absolutely hilarious, but I really believe that.
Yeah.
I really deeply do, because I've experienced things personally that I have experienced, and that is what it is.
And does that contributes to the sort of placelessness of it, and also about you relating to yourself, right, as the creator, and then other people are allowed to relate to it, but it's sort of a reflexive process of self-understanding. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's great.
So I essentially cut them into strips, however I can, because usually they're really bizarre shapes, none of them are the same, and then I hole punch them with I have like a hand, I hole punch them with a hand hole punch that has an arm crank, so I kind of feed them through, and I turn into like a sewing machine, if you could imagine. I put those in, and then
You pull them through.
pump, and I pull them through as I pump, and I go quite quickly.
That's good.
And then I have to cut them all into tiny squares again, which I do regularly.
So you were saying something before about there being some contrasting what you're doing here with, say, mechanized production. That what were you guys saying? Something about this being different to what you were saying. It's all coming from you. You're not like
Doing the
person
whole
on an
process.
assembly line.
Even though it feels like it should be an assembly line because of the processes that are involved.
So yeah, the fact that it's got this heavily manual component, which is repetitive, and that definitely does sort of symbolise that type of making of the last century, of kind of just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And yet this is obviously a more holistic process for you, because it's your idea and you're expressing yourself through it.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And I think it's funny because it's like, I'm actually okay to take a long time to make works. I think had I been younger, I may not have had the patience, but I'm actually alright with the time, which seems weird because time is changing shape again. Like it seems like it's going faster.
For you personally, or just
Yeah.
the world? And is that what's that to do with? Do you
I
think?
think it's just age, and
You've got
like
a lot going on.
age and where you're at. Like,
Jam-packed life.
yeah, you know what it's like to have lots going on. But it's like, each day is moving really quickly.
Yeah.
And I do think when you do make things that take a long time changes shape, and you can really slow it down and use it differently. Use it in a different way.
Is there frustration involved in the laboriousness of it? Does it get frustrating sometimes?
No, that was one thing an art lecturer said to me once. I'm okay with.
This is what you said.
He was like, "Oh, you're okay with that?" Like other people may get frustrated, but no, I don't.
You don't get
It's just
frustrated.
quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although it makes sense given what you just said about when you're making, that's a time when you basically
There you
think
go.
and feel and everything comes back and things make sense. Maybe like that isn't that surprising. It's a meditation in a way. I suppose.
Yeah, and as you say, like, where is home? Well, this is it. Like it's like that's
Yeah.
so that's my time of when I'm home, I suppose. Really.
But you have sold
that-
quite a few works, and when you do
Yeah.
sell a work, is that hard, letting go of your work, or is
Absolutely not.
it? It's not, the money is welcome. And
Not even that. It's
No.
more just like my attachment. The reason I only have the black bust over there is because of Hugh. He just really loves it and wants to keep it. I, on the other hand, am very happy to pass it on. Because to pass it on, that's the whole idea. Is that there is a shared reality going on. There is a shared experience of time. And I don't have I'm not that materialistic for objects, and
So you don't need to hold on to things in that way.
no, it's too. I can be,
You can let go.
can let go. I feel like a lot of artists though, like over my years of going to studios and people's houses, and like we love being collectors of things. And there's a lot of holding an identity imbued in those objects, which I really respect and love, because I think that's sort of, as I was like in my formative years of like reading about art history and finding out about other artists and other female artists and male artists, and everyone's sort of different skews on how they perceive the world or process the world or reflect, and then what people want from those reflections and how they interpret what's worthy of taking or not. I think it's sort of been really interesting to see. As I've gotten older, I've actually gotten less stuff.
That is interesting.
I thought I would get more, but I've gotten less.
I think it's to do with you just realise at some point that you can't keep everything, and over the years you get more and more clutter, and it just starts feeling
That's a burden.
unnecessary and impossible. Yeah, and also I've found like things like people dying and stuff, you realise after a while that the stuff doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't. Like you've got them in you, and all the stuff doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't. Like you've got them in you, and all the stuff just doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I agree. But yeah, I feel like all through the 80s, 70s, 80s, 60s, 90s, like all the everyone used to have a lot of attachment to identity with relation to what they had, rather than now maybe the attention to or the identity that we have is not related to what we have.
I hope that's true. That sounds like a good thing, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
With even the language changing and everything that's sort of happening, I suppose. I don't know. Like home. At home, I don't know.
So when you were talking before about art being the thing that sort of anchors you in some way, do you think it sounds like it's the art process rather than the art results that do? Because you can let go of your end products, but this
no, they have to look a
continues.
certain way. I definitely have a particular aesthetic that
Clearly
I really wish to uphold.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's just that feeling that needs to be translated. But I think that I'm just this bit here, and I'll just do that, and then I'll talk. I can't talk to you and do that. See,
you've done a great job.
I think for me it's both. Like it's absolutely integral that the piece is beyond. Well, I like them to be otherworldly, I suppose. There's like an element of I don't know what you would call it. I'm trying to think of the right word. That Ginn used in that essay. And I talked a lot about it.
It's like natural or something like that.
Yeah, like more like a. Well, it's that universal. Universal is such a funny word. What's the word I'm looking for? Like my making process is about making, and the end product is continuously reevaluated as I go along in the moment as well. So there's a framework, a very structured framework that I know well, and then that is essentially affected along the way. But at the beginning there's always a concept of a feeling that is imbued into it. So that's really important to me, that feeling is in not a necessarily. I used to be a heavily conceptual artist. I think that's shifted quite a bit with relation to my materials now, that it is just really pared back to like the basics. Like I can make this with nothing, really, don't even really need glue anymore. Like I just need some nails, I could get by, I could make it with the minimum. It's a larger discussion, or it's a larger process. You're trying to work with something outside of yourself as well.
Yeah, and there's that's the complexity of it.
Yeah.
It's a complex thing.
Yeah.
How just off, and I'm not quite sure how to ask it, but basically, how would you describe or contextualize the aesthetic of your work? Where do you see it sitting?
I don't know. I actually have never known. There's a few other artists that make work, I suppose, in a similar way-ish, but then again not.
Who would they be?
There was another woman, do you know Jazz Kitson's work? But it's more like her older work. She does a lot of, she works with porcelain and does these gigantic beasts that are like on the wall, and now she's using other materials. So her visual language is like just exploded into like fur, maybe porcelain, fur, plastic, maybe bone, and she's using found objects as well. When I showed with her, we both showed in the Melbourne Art Fair at the same time. Her work was quite like repetitive like mine and sort of one material, sort of porcelain. And I was like, oh, sort of have a look at her work and just enjoy it and see what she does. But her work's shifted quite a bit in the last couple of years, I suppose, because she hasn't had a family.
Yeah.
Whereas I have had a largish family in a small period of time, and that's allowed me to explore my materials more because I haven't been able to push my practice as far.
Yeah.
But aesthetically, I don't really know. Honestly, I don't really know, Helen. It's one question I can't really put my finger on. I've asked myself.
Yeah, the reason I asked you was because...
Do you have any insight?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what I think.
Great.
I just wanted to ask you.
Great, because I'm like, I got nothing here.
Well, what it's like when I look at it, it feels like there's a kind of a, I don't know, almost like African or tribal or...
Yeah, that's a key
There's
word.
there's a definite sense of that, and yet I wouldn't pin it. I wouldn't want to go like, oh, it looks African, or oh, it looks whatever, any indigenous to any culture. It doesn't, but it has a vibe of something like that. But given everything you were saying about not feeling like you belong anywhere in particular, it's sort of quite interesting to think that in a way it's almost like an international. Language, but with roots in something
Archaic.
really historical.
Yeah, archaic is a word that I relate to.
Tribal's tricky, isn't it?
Tribal's Picasso,
Yeah.
and I can't get past the male of tribal and what they did to tribal art.
Yeah, but we shouldn't let them own it either, because it's also its own thing.
No, it's totally its own thing. But I struggle with the canonisation of art and that word and the male dominated area of that, because they really did a number on all Indigenous art practices. And so for me it's tricky because I don't know what really word to use, and archaic seems like shamanistic, ritualistic. I'm not an Indigenous person. But I absolutely, I feel like I understand parts of people's cultures and why they do certain things that they do, but I don't have that in my culture. And so it's a very confusing conversation, because it's like, it's not mine. I'm a human in the world that relates to things in a very tactile and a personal, emotional, deep way, and yet there's no real language there for me to use and or feel connected to.
Well, I think that's the case for every white Australian, actually. Yeah. But it's almost like you are creating your own aesthetic language in a way, which I think, because you wouldn't go, oh, that's that, or that's that. It has a flavour of various things, but it's its own thing, which just ties in really nicely with the fact that you don't feel that particular connection to any one thing. Yeah, I mean, I've looked at African. I used to do portraits all through my teenage years in big soft pastel. Yeah. And that was like something that I did repeatedly. And I had the UNICEF World Children's Book. Yeah. And I remember those beautiful photograph books of all the cultures in the world. And I used to draw all of the people's faces, just, with, and I loved all the differences between us all. And that's sort of where I've come from, I suppose, in that viewing of other cultures. And then I looked at, of course, tribal work and masks, and of course my parents had some. And then I had books of my own of a whole lot of different cultures, historical ways of communicating cultural identity and sacred ceremonies, and I look to those for knowledge and for understanding of myself, because I don't have any of those rites of passage. So I just look outside and figure it out myself, essentially. So that's where mine comes from. So I love African art. I love their dancing. I love all their processes. I love Hinduism and Thai Busan. Do you know Thai Busan in Malaysia? No. Do you know it's like a cleansing ritual that goes for
I would say a week or so, 4 or 5 days, and they walk up Bartu Caves in trances, and they drink toddy, you know, the fermented coconut, and they smoke. I don't know what the smoke is, but I went with some friends as a teenager to that at like 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, you'd have to get in on train tracks. Couldn't get parked closely. We knew the area really well because we were all teenagers there and had been to the Bartu Caves before, but it's a ceremony, ritualistic practice that doesn't happen in India because too many people die, but they still practice it in Malaysia. It's amazing. Wow. And there's hooks throughout the backs, and then people pull on them. They're in an amazing space, and they walk around with giant cages that are hooked into their torsos, and they carry newborn babies in coloured sarongs up the steps. There's like 1,500 steps up into the Monkey Bartu limestone caves, and then they come out of their trance at the top. Gosh. And I saw that as like I don't know how old I was, 16 or something. Amazing. And it was just amazing to watch and to be a part of, because you sort of got the music and the environment went in you.
So that's amazing. In terms of, so that in a way was your home at that time. You were living there with your family. So that's going to add something really particular to, you know, home and place. And for that to be a moment in your history of home is going to be confusing almost when you come back here. You'd think like,
it was absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
But you know, it was horrific moving back to Australia. But as I knew already at that age, that it'd take me about a year and a half, and then I'd be all right.
Yeah, wow.
You were across that process. Yeah, I knew a year and a half, and I'll feel like it's home again, or some place that I know, and that I will be able to function. I'll feel less like a fish out of water. But yeah, it was just like that constantly. So it's definitely. Yes, you read it really well, Helen. It is making, I think that's what it is though, isn't it? It's like making sense.
Yeah.
So making my own language has been really important for me as a person in the world. And something that also isn't outside of, it does or somewhat already exist, if you know what I mean. It's not like I'm recreating anything new, or there's no like epiphany.
In a way, I reckon you are creating something new because you're bringing together all these elements in a new person in a new way. Like it's exactly this hasn't been done before. You know?
No, it hasn't.
But as with the material process, you're taking what's pre-existing and you're turning it into something which is obviously unique.
I reckon that's.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's